tenant in New York was able to stay his eviction 5 times, and it took more than 4 years before a landlord was able to finally evict him. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. Alright, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's coming out of New York City, and it has to do with how slow the eviction process is within the city and the state as well. So basically, there was a tenant, and the tenant decided to stop paying rent for whatever reason, be it justified or not. But it took the landlord more than 4 years to be able to get this tenant out of their property, and that's too long. It is ridiculously long. And you know what? The problem that a lot of landlords are having in places like New York isn't that they can't file the eviction. They can file the eviction just fine, but they are giving tenants unlimited stays. They're letting them keep the process rolling for indefinite periods of time. And that means that the landlord has to continually take that loss for months, if not years on end. And that is exactly what happened in this story here. You know, it's really a cautionary tale for those people who think, oh, you know what, the eviction process isn't so bad in New York. Yeah, it's bad. And if the tenant knows how to play the system, it's even worse. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. So I'm just curious, for the different landlords across the country, how long does it take to remove a tenant from your property once you get the eviction process rolling where you live or invest, okay? Obviously, places like New York varies greatly. Here, it can be a month or two, okay? Very short. Very short. There's almost no relief for tenants. So you know what? I suggest that people only invest in places where they can set their own rents and where they can evict the tenant or not renew a lease if they choose to do so. Okay? So if you're investing in a place where those things aren't options, you're likely going to fall into some sort of trouble at some point in time. Anyway, let me get into this article. This article is coming from The Real Deal, and it says, 4 years, $60,000 in arrears. A portrait of housing court delays at their worst. Keith Zarrett stayed his eviction 5 times, claiming money was coming. Let's get into it. Edward Calico first sued to evict Keith Zarrett in November 2020. It took him 4 years to finally get his tenant out. Zarrett, like so many New Yorkers, quit paying rent when COVID hit, then claimed financial hardship when Calico, the third-generation head of an eponymous Long Island-based firm, filed for eviction. A statewide moratorium kept Zarrett in his apartment in Forest Hill, Queens, and after a 2-year wait, his application for rent relief was okayed. So you're thinking, oh yeah, see, the system works. Obviously, the rent relief went to the landlord. The tenant was able to not get evicted while they were facing some sort of financial hardship. Everything is right. Well, let me continue because that is not what happened. Landlord advocates say that the suit reflects the nightmarish delays that the LeFrak organization sued over last year. Adjournment after adjournment to allow tenants every chance to find a lawyer or the cash to cover back rent. This is something that is being experienced by landlords across the board in each and every county of the city. Nativ Winiarski of Cucker, Marino, Winiarski, and Bittens, who is representing LeFrak in the ongoing suit, said, Zarrett, court document signal, was the type of tenant who needed that grace. Yeah, they say, well, you know what, the tenant needs grace. You know, we're going to give you time to, you know, but remember, every second, every minute, every day that the landlord waits is a continued loss upon that landlord. You know, basically telling them, well, you know what, they just need more time to get back on their feet, more time to find the money, more time to find a job. Well, time isn't free when it comes to somebody living in your property. Somebody has to pay those bills. When it comes to my properties, it is me who has to pay the mortgage, the taxes, the insurance, the maintenance, the property management, etc. Okay? There's a lot of bills involved, and those bills don't stop coming just because the tenant is going through a hard time right now and doesn't have a job. So what's the solution? The solution is We allow the eviction process to go through. It is not the landlord's responsibility to sit there and wait indefinitely so maybe the tenant can get a job. That's stupid. It's absolutely idiotic. Instead, the tenant, if they can't get a job, they need to get the heck out of there. Allow the landlord to rent their property out to someone who can pay. Period. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're like, oh, well, these are some rich, greedy landlords. They've got billions of dollars. The problem is, though, that during the pandemic, in some cases, 30% of tenants were deciding they just didn't want to pay. They just didn't want to pay. So even a large company with, millions of dollars and lots of properties, they can't take the hit of losing 30% of their income. They can't. It's too much. So you instantly push them into a recession where now we're talking about, oh, well, these properties, they might get taken back by the bank. And you know what? It's even worse than that, though, because keep in mind that New York is one of the few places that has rent control. So let's say that the tenants stop paying rent. Well, you can't even increase the rent on the tenants who are continuing to pay because you're stuck under these rent control policies. So yeah, they've created a situation where landlords are going to fall into financial distress because they are delaying the eviction process and giving the tenant too much time. And you know what? It's not efficient, it's not fast, and it shouldn't be legal. It shouldn't be legal. And I understand why landlords are suing over the slow pace of this whole eviction process in New York. The pandemic served an unspecified financial blow. Then, his teenage daughter was murdered just months before Calico sued him for the second time. A commercial broker, Zarette, claims he was waiting on deals to close and the city to approve his request for a one-shot deal, money that can go toward back rent. But affidavits submitted by Calico's lawyer, Adam Cooper, paint Zarette differently. The tenant may have been down and out, but he also knew how to work housing court and for quite some time succeeded, showing just how badly the system may be broken. Zarette did not respond to a request for comment. At first, the delays preventing Zarette's eviction were typical. Cooper details in court documents. Calico waited 4 months for an intake appointment and another 2 so Zarette could find an attorney. LaFrac, in its suit, noted lengthy waits for similar reasons. So this guy had to wait 4 months just so this tenant could get an appointment, and then another couple months just so he can get an attorney. What kind of, this is nonsense. This is absolute nonsense. All he's doing is accumulating more debt. They gave him rental assistance. The rental assistance didn't even cover the entire amount that this guy owed. Basically, this guy is so deep in the hole that there's no way he's going to be able to catch up. Yet, the process still got dragged out. It still took forever. I understand why people get out of the rental business in places like this. I understand why. Because this is frustrating. This is absolutely awful. Terrible. Okay? The way that they treat property owners in New York it's criminal. This should be unconstitutional. Just dragging it out, just forcing landlords to eat these bills. That's what the worst part is, right? You would be criminally negligent according to their laws if you said, okay, well, we're not going to we're not going to pay any of our bills or do any of this stuff, but the tenant is allowed to do this and faces no consequences. That's what my problem is, okay? The fact that they allow tenants to do this to landlords and those tenants face no consequences for their actions. So what do you think, okay? Do you think that New York is dragging these cases out too long? Do you think that tenants need this much of an opportunity to try to put something together to pay their landlord? I know what I think. I think that this whole system is a farce and it's unfixable. It's unfixable. You would have to rip the system apart from the ground up, and that's just not going to happen. So, back to my original point. Don't invest there. Don't put a penny there. Take your money elsewhere where you're treated right, and from the get-go, you won't have these issues.